If you're a woman juggling work, family relationships, and everything in between, you know how easy it is to feel drained, overwhelmed, stressed, and even on the edge of burnout. What if I told you that your mineral levels are playing a major role in how well your body handles stress and recovers from exhaustion? Today, we are going to deep dive into the connection between minerals and stress and burnout recovery, especially for women who are doing it all. We're going to explore which minerals are depleted under stress and how they impact your hormones, mental clarity, and importantly, how you can start replenishing them to feel more balanced and vibrant. So if you're ready to dive in, I can't wait for you to hear our episode. Let's get into it. Awesome. Hello and welcome to the Holistic Health and Hormones podcast. I'm so excited to have Kristen Kershaw with us today. We're going to talk about burnout and stress resilience and literally how minerals play a role in burnout and recovery. A bit about Kristen. She is the founder of Supporting Balance, a health coaching business dedicated to helping people take charge of their health by addressing the root cause of their symptoms, particularly mineral imbalances. She has a background in science and is always fascinated by how biological systems interconnect. And it wasn't until she had a youngest daughter in 2012 that she knew the true knowledge of that. She was a lead trainer for over 5 years at the Root Cause Protocol Institute, where she's taught students all over the world, from those wanting answers to health professionals like GPs, dentists, neurologists. And she's super passionate about simplifying complex science into bite-sized, actionable insights. So welcome, Kristen, to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So tell me a little bit about your background, what made you get into it, and a little bit more about why, when having your daughter, it was, really made you more passionate and, wanting to learn more about minerals. And what have you discovered in that time? I'd love to hear more.
It's been interesting. So in my early days, I trained in animal science and ecological systems. I trained or did teaching, I guess, at universities. So doing the practical classes and that sort of thing in nursing and biology student type labs, ended up in molecular biology laboratories. So I've done a range of things in that regard, but I had a shift after my twins, who were 18.
Oh, twins. Wow.
Yeah, they're my older two. So after that time, I ended up in a technical writing kind of field. So I pivoted from science and got into more technical writing and explaining hard things. And it was more engineering focused, actually, but it used that technical skill to take in complex information and write it in such a way that we were often sending equipment to countries where English may not have been the first language, or things needed to be translated. So I needed to have it as simple as I could. And so that sort of twisted my science knowledge into a different field. But then when I had my youngest in 2012, she would projectile vomit everywhere. She was a very unsettled baby. And I'd had 2 reflux babies at the same time. And I'm like, I can do one. And then I came to realize that one very refluxy baby who could projectile vomit a meter and a half away from
her, that's a skill.
Like, that takes skills and, profuse amount of washing. And so I modified my diet to try and help. I heard that going gluten and dairy free might help. And I thought that we already ate fairly well, but I started to come to understand just how many additives were in a lot of the foods. Even if you ate cleanly, really didn't have that many packet things or whatever. But we were, I would say, a pretty typical Australian household at that stage, but on the, less junk, cooked a lot of food at home, but still ate some packet things or whatever. So learning just how much else is in the food and learning with her that a lot of foods were her trigger. So very long story short, I ended up on about 15 foods that she could tolerate. And so as a breastfeeding mum, I would opt for a really restricted diet and a happy baby and a non-projectile vomiting and all, sleep is important for all of us. And she was also growing pretty slowly. So I was trying to adjust so that she was not vomiting. So she would put that into growing rather than the reflux. So it started me down the path. She ended up with a diagnosis quite young of something called eosinophilic esophagitis, which is very, it's unusual for a baby to get the diagnosis, but I lucked into a very good pediatrician who listened to what was going on with her and my older kids when they were younger and It's like, oh, yeah, by the way, I think your son's got it too. And I'm like, oh, good. Thanks. Can you write that down for me? Because I'm not really sure what it is, but it's basically an allergic reaction in the throat to the food that's being eaten. So for a breastfed baby, she was reacting to more of the foods. I hadn't yet eliminated everything. That was fairly early on. But I kept asking why and going, this doesn't make sense. Is there something we can do? And so when a gastroenterologist said, well, you're not going to be able to breastfeed this baby as long as you actually need to get past this, because she's always going to be reacting to something.
Yeah.
He said in one breath, well, I don't think she's got eosinophilic esophagitis. But then on the other side, he went, what are you feeding this baby at 6 months old? I'm like, she's a breastfed baby.
Yeah, that's
breast milk and a little bit of food she's grabbed off the plate. But at that stage, it was literally the day she turned 6 months old. She reacted to sweet potato and
you think
chicken,
sweet potato's healthy, right? And chicken.
right? And they're simple first foods for kids.
Yeah.
And rice. And the only thing out of the 3 foods that she tolerated was the rice. And to this day, rice is a love that she adores. But he's like, oh, well, you're not feeding that baby enough solids. Go away, feed her more food. And when she's gagging, come back to me and I'll help you. And I'm like, but you want me to make her gag and make her get more irritated in her throat?
Yeah.
And he said, yeah, you won't be able to breastfeed her, so you may as well give her this tin of formula and start feeding her that, because it tastes pretty gross. So give it to her when she's younger and she'll actually drink it. You leave it too long, she won't drink it. And I'm like,
isn't breast milk supposed to be better than formula, supposedly?
Exactly.
Like, why would you replace something synthetic, right, with natural breast milk?
Exactly. And I took it as you can't do it in my mind. I'm like, I literally can breastfeed. So many women can't. And I understand that so many women end up so tired. And speaking of the burnout topic, they need permission from someone to go, it's okay to go to something. And I don't begrudge anyone who chooses to formula feed if they really are at the end of their tether and they can't find the solution. There's sometimes a need for it. But I was able to breastfeed and it was okay. So I'm like, or I could just keep breastfeeding my child. So anyway, they were going to do scopes down her throat and lots of invasive things. And a lot of kids with that diagnosis continue to be on the elemental formula right through until their teenage years, sometimes even further. Like it's a long-term, no solution for type thing, according to the medical world. And so I just kept asking questions. And I stumbled into magnesium of all things. And I started to put magnesium on my feet. It was probably 2 or 3 months.
Like a foot rub, like a magnesium rub, or like
just
a gel
magnesium
cream
spray, just plain magnesium chloride spray. And the first week I put on 4 sprays, so 2 on each foot before I went to bed. And then the next week I did 6 in total, and then 8. And by week 3, she was sleeping through the night.
Oh, amazing!
Yeah, feeling better, and she was less, chucky, and generally you could tell that she was feeling a lot better. And I went, how can just a bit of magnesium on me too? Like it wasn't on her directly. How can that make she would have been about 9 months old, I guess, by that stage, baby sleep and so much better? And so I kept asking questions and stumbled into the world of mineral balancing, starting with the magnesium, and came to learn a whole lot more.
So had you never taken any supplementation of any sort up until that point? Like even during pregnancy, was it just a prenatal? And after obviously giving birth in the first 6 to 9 months, was just through food and diet, and no one mentioned anything about supplementation, vitamins? Was it something you'd looked at?
I had done prenatals, and I think I was probably still taking them, or a breastfeeding something or other or whatever. I kind of did as need be. With my twins, I took Fefol, which is iron and folate, and I did with part of her pregnancy, but it actually didn't feel right for that. And I've since come to learn there's a lot of harm that can come from taking synthetic Bs and iron, and I'm very, I'm just like, I realize that's probably contributed to a lot of the dysregulation, but that's kind of down the other end of the story. We'll get there later. But I had been taking a Caltrate tablet for about 10 years, but I also later worked out that was calcium, vitamin D, maybe a little bit of magnesium. And I think I'd been taking just like a over-the-counter supermarket brand of magnesium, but the forms of magnesium were not ideal, and they often don't disclose what's in there.
And that is a huge topic that I talk to my clients about. Like they said, I'm taking magnesium. But like you said, there is like 20 forms of magnesium, probably more, right? And you're taking the right form for what are you trying to do? Like, is it sleep? Is it muscle cramps? Is it for, stress release? Is it
Yep.
for your heart? Is it for circulation, for sports recovery? Like there's every individual's different and your needs are different. Like, so yeah, we'll jump into different forms of magnesium in a little bit. But a lot of people aren't on any minerals. They go, oh, I'm getting it all from my diet. I've got a great diet, whether you've just had a baby, which is even more, right? Like your body's gone through so much.
Yep.
In terms of what, you've delivered a baby, it's stressful. You're probably using up a lot more magnesium stores than normal, right? And so, people are like, oh, I'm eating fine. I don't need to supplement at all, right, with anything.
And the thing is, what I've come to realize over the 12 years since this was all sort of, I guess it's a bit under 12 since I first found it, but over all this time, like I now eat a very good diet and I still can't get enough of all of those just from diet. Right. And stress is a huge, huge thing. So it was mid-2013 when I found out about the magnesium. And then by early 2014, I had a hair mineral tissue analysis done in my hair and got some bloods done. And I was so depleted across the board. And I mean, I'd been including magnesium for quite a time by this stage, but I'd had a lifetime of stress. So the man that I met, his name was Morley Robbins. He's a guy that I've worked with and been trained by since. And it was mind-blowing because he helped me to connect the stress of my entire life and what that led to. So the year before I was pregnant with my youngest, I had an ectopic pregnancy.
Wow.
I was very, very sick and lucky that the hospital didn't kill me. They did a really good effort towards trying, it seems. So a lot of in and out and ignoring what was actually the signs that were there and so on. Oh, he's just having a miscarriage. And I'm like, no, there's something more wrong.
Yeah.
But that's when I started to trust my instincts a lot more. With my twins, I'd been, oh, you do this, oh, you do that. And it just never felt right. People were telling me what to do with two babies when they didn't know what raising two babies was like. And I just sort of, well, I don't know any better. And so the ectopic really taught me I had to advocate for myself and what was feeling right. And so by the time I got to my youngest, I was like, this does not feel good, what I was being told, and that there's never any hope that she will have any other way.
Oh, so that's not what a first mother wants. That's not what a mother who's just had a baby wants to hear, right? I just deal with it. She'll grow out of it. And months and years later, haven't grown out of it yet.
Yeah. And I see so many women especially, and parents generally, but women who try and advocate for their kids and they know that things are not adding up right, that something isn't quite, it's not the way it should be. They're going, but why? And they're shut down and they're told it just, oh, don't worry about it. You wouldn't know about that. And I hate that, the gaslighting and just undermining of that instinct that we don't need to know the why something's not adding up, but there can be something that's not adding up. And so we remineralized. We were told in the process of all the medical side of things that she might have 40 or 50 safe foods by the time she was 5 and starting school. And we found that she was more likely 40 or 50 that she couldn't have by then. And a lot of it was just we hadn't tried, we just hadn't got to. So these days, and for probably the last 7 or 8 years, I suppose, she's celiac, so we stay away from gluten. The whole family does. And we all feel better off gluten anyway. Yeah. But other than that, we can eat whatever we want. And she's a normal, average 12-year-old. She's picked up growth. You wouldn't pick that she was ever quite a little dainty baby and that she had the slower growth. And that all came down to the minerals. But in the meantime, I don't get migraines anymore. My hormones are better balanced in my 40s than they've ever been. It was quite a mind-blowing thing to think all these just simple building blocks of real food where we can and some extra nutrients from things like magnesium. It can make that much difference.
A lot of difference. We'll go to magnesium a bit more, but let's talk about burnout. I guess with being, someone who's dealt with twins and a baby that was continuous throwing up, and even those who don't have children at all, but have a very stressful job and everyday life, we hear so much about burnout. How would you define burnout, and what is the first symptoms people can start to look at, and what are some real solutions if they go to the doctor and they're like, oh, you'll be fine, just rest more or doing something else. And it's like, oh, just work on the stress, but like, how do you work on the stress, right? That's the thing. And what can you do to take the things to work on that, or, you know, all of that. But yeah, burnout and stress, like what do you normally see or hear, you know, that's common? And, you know, what are some of the things that lead to burnout? Because obviously we're trying to prevent burnout, but yet when you get to burnout, it's way too late. So how can we start looking at early signs and symptoms?
It's often those niggles of, are you falling asleep at your desk at work? I remember doing that when I was pregnant, which is not a surprise, but even at times where you're getting noddy, where you're like the mid-afternoon kind of.
Is that the mid-afternoon after a big lunch nap and you're like, oh, I can't keep my eyes open. I just want to have like a nap right now.
Yeah. Brain fog, that general fuzziness where you just don't feel yourself. I would get migraines and or headaches, and that was a stress response, and it was like a self-protect. And I look back to the year before I had my youngest, and I was getting them all the time, and I was in a stressful situation with my job. I didn't feel valued. I didn't feel like I was getting heard or seen or whatever. In the end, I left that job and we moved cities. And then we did that. And then I fell pregnant with my youngest. So I'm like, oh my goodness, the biggest stresses of, you know, what you can as an adult is big job changes, moving cities, moving whole everything, uplifting the family. Any of those where
having twins.
Yeah, right.
People deal with one, let alone like, you know, it's stressful enough with one child. I can't imagine two. Yeah.
And the twins were just about to start primary school. So there was a lot of stress with we didn't know what we were doing. The first child is the experiment. We just had two at the same time. How do we do this school thing? And how do you pick the right school? And a lot of that sort of thing. The twins had their own share of health issues. Again, we were a typical Australian family, I think, but we had asthma and eczema and some speech delays and that sort of thing, which we later found out was related to tongue ties, which and then we visited with my youngest, and that's nutrient related too when you're pregnant, but it doesn't get talked about. But the more stressed we are, the more likely tongue ties and a whole lot of other things are likely to be. So you may be sleeping a lot or wanting to sleep a lot. So you wake up and you're not really refreshed. You may find it really hard to go to sleep. So you're wired and you're tired. These can be all little signs from my point of view that your minerals are out of balance and you could be reaching burnout. You feel like you're much more prone to injury. So you try and do a bit of exercise and then you're really sore or something doesn't feel sort of in the right spot. Indecision mentally, you're just like, I'm overwhelmed. I just can't make a decision. Don't make me do another one. Just you choose. So these are all, the thing is, from a metabolic point of view and from like the minerals angle, if our body has these inputs, like where we've got a bear behind us or a tiger or some imminent danger, body's going to prioritize our heart beating and our kidneys working and the things and the muscles, our big muscles, so we can run or fight.
That's it. Yeah.
The digestion, it gets put down the lower end of the scale.
It's not important when you're trying to run away. It doesn't care if you're trying to digest your food. Exactly. You're trying to get out of the saber-toothed tiger.
Survive tomorrow. Yeah, you know. And your hormones will get out of balance. So your cycles for women may be completely skewed. They may be longer, shorter, heavier. Then we try and take a multivitamin or an over-the-counter. We take some iron, and that actually puts a lot more pressure on the body. So we're trying to offset the tiredness. We may get told that we're low iron, which I'm sure you see a lot of people,
heavy periods, and it's like your iron is really low, right? So let's take an iron, and then they're getting all these side effects from the iron.
Exactly. And the extra iron in the body isn't solving the underlying imbalance. And so the body will often get heavier with the periods and worse with the cycles because you haven't solved the reason why the cycle was funky in the first place, both from a burnout point of view, but also the imbalances of that fight flight. Because when we're in fight flight mode, we lose magnesium, our potassium metabolism is completely changed. And then the long-term stress, so chronic stress, turns into changes in bioavailable copper, which means we can't activate the pathways we need to move iron effectively. We can't make energy. We can't digest. We can't do a whole bunch of stuff. So it's sort of any little symptoms that just make you feel out of the ordinary, where you're going from pillar to post, you're up all day, doom scrolling. Anyone?
They wake up at 1 a.m. and they're like, oh, I can't sleep for an hour. Let's just go on my phone or do something. And it's like, well, you shouldn't be awake for a solid hour or two in the middle of the night, right?
Yeah, it's calming that nervous system response down. But if you don't have the minerals there in the first place, your body's going to be hypervigilant because it goes, well, I don't think I can run away from this danger. I don't think I can fight. So I'm just going to make you hypervigilant so you can go find someone else to solve this.
Mm.
And it becomes a self-fulfilling kind of cycle then, because you're so tired and you're so worn out that you actually can't make decisions or make healthy foods, or, you know, the cycle continues.
Yeah. So in your experience, what are some of the specific minerals? We've covered sort of magnesium, but what other minerals are specific to, I guess, treating chronic stress, burnout, and all of those symptoms that we talk about? Because they're kind of very similar, right? Stress and burnout, it might be stress leading to burnout. So yeah.
I tend to encourage people to start with something simple, and that's a drink called an adrenal cocktail. It's a healthy electrolyte drink, because we don't realize, and again, I'm sure you see this a lot too, that people are not as hydrated as they should be. But it's
very dehydrated. They're smoking. A lot of them are drinking 1 cup of water, if that, right? And migraines daily. I had a client with migraines daily, no water, lots of caffeine, smoking. It's very common. And they don't put it down to being chronically dehydrated. I mean,
it's
huge.
all intertwined.
Correct, yeah.
And so you can then go and drink lots of water, but you're not giving yourself the electrolytes. Historically, if we drank spring water, we would have gotten a lot of natural minerals from that water as well, and especially potassium. A lot of your seasonal fruit and vegetables throughout the year, doesn't, like at the moment it might be summer, but all year round we have great sources of potassium, but most of us don't get anywhere near the RDI of potassium. So when we're stressed or when we're burnt out or heading towards burnout, potassium is really important. And people, to a degree, of, I think, liberated being scared of salt. For a time, people were really fearful of salt. There are still some who are, but you need salt, sodium, you need potassium. And so the adrenal cocktail is just half a cup of orange juice, 1/4 teaspoon of salt, and 1/4 teaspoon of cream of tartar. And between the orange juice and the cream of tartar, that gives you a decent little portion of potassium. And that can make so many people just feel calmer, and it nourishes. So our adrenal glands, I'm sure everybody's at some point or another heard
adrenals fatigue. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, adrenal fatigue, adrenal burnout, all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So our adrenals are very important during fight-flight responses, and they should be, from my understanding, about the size of a walnut. But a lot of the time ours shrink over time because they're so burned out. And so that's the one biggest storage place for us for vitamin C. We can't make our own vitamin C. We have to store some in the adrenal glands and replenish it frequently. So the vitamin C from the adrenal cocktail plus the electrolytes gives that sense to the body of, I've got some of the nutrients I need, I'm safe, and it can help with migraines, it can help with better sleep, it can just help with generally feeling calmer within. And it's just orange juice, cream of tartar, and salt. So that's where I often get people to start.
Wow, it's very simple. We can get it at the supermarket. It's easier to make. Would they make that fresh daily, or could you put a batch in the fridge and maybe have a sip of that? Or was it best to probably make, I guess, with fresh orange juice? What do you suggest?
Good, better, best. So if you can get something like Nudie orange juice or one of the brands,
one of those,
oranges, no ascorbic acid, nothing else added to it.
Yeah.
Fair enough. If you can get organic oranges, that would be my ultimate vote, and just squeeze them yourself. It's about 1 orange, give or take, a decent sized orange. So, and I wouldn't get too particular. If you've got a little bit less orange juice, just have it anyway. Or if you've got a bit extra, there are some other recipes. I can give you a link to put in the show notes potentially, to like using coconut water, and there's other variations. So you can do
let's just talk a bit about water, I guess. Like you're mentioning water, and then we're going to coconut water and things which are supposed to be hydrating. I mean, I've heard coconut water is definitely way more hydrating, just plain water, but even water, like you've got distilled water, you've got then reverse osmosis water, pH, alkaline water, tap water, spring water, sparkling water, like all of those. Like, gosh, there's so many types of water.
Yeah.
Right. What is your take on just water, which is so important? Let's talk about various different types of water, because people are just drink straight from the tap, or I'm just drinking, like bottled water. Yeah.
Yep.
Big topic.
So there's lots of different, you nailed it so much. There's so many different perspectives on this. I'm good for simplifying where I can. So if people can get some sort of filter on their tap, do that. Even if it's just a benchtop one where you put it through and have it in, that's better than nothing. I dislike tap water with a passion.
Oh, yes, I agree.
The junk that gets put in it is Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard also the minerals, like there are some, if you don't believe us, go and have a look at some YouTube videos. There's some great things that people testing water, like if you've got the equipment, go, but people have done it for you, can see all the discoloration. And I've heard that a lot of the pipes, especially in Australia, probably all over the world, the pipes are so old that once the water's coming through, all of the heavy metals is picking with it, plus the fluoride that's been added. Look, we could be on, but some people are like, oh, I just take tap water and I boil it. So then there's a boiling of tap water, right? That takes away some bacteria, but it doesn't take away any of the other things, right?
Yeah, you might get rid of a little bit of chlorine, but you're really not getting rid of much. So if you can only do some basic filtration, fantastic.
Sure. Yeah.
If you
even
can
Brita filter, some sort of even a filter is still better than coming straight from tap water and drinking.
Absolutely, without a doubt. And then I'm not actually a fan. A lot of people like doing distilled water or reverse osmosis. I'm not a fan of those unless you do something like add minerals back in. So there are some that remineralize as a part of the units. I use something like, for the video, you can see it's called Amina's Daily Boost. It's a mineral replenisher, and I actually get people to do that no matter what they do with their water, to have some of that every day, ideally in their water bottle as they're drinking throughout the day or in their cooking water or whatever, so that they're getting a little bit. It's great for kids. It's one of the early starts that I get people doing as well, because so many of us are parched for minerals because we don't get it from water like we once would.
And they're not taking a mineral supplement or anything like that. So all they're doing is drinking and diet, which is very depleted. We'll go into food sources and the depletion of minerals there. But so you suggest, so obviously if you haven't got any option, get a cheap filter or some filter of any sort and adding like obviously like a liquid or trace mineral of something. But so many people just drink tap water and I drink water, but what water? How much water? What's the quality of water? Is because we're supposedly taking 2 to 3 liters, it makes a big difference, the type of water
Absolutely.
Let's talk about coconut water. I love coconut water. I give it to my kids in the summer. You know, it's our thing. Instead of drinking juice, I'll be like, hey, let's drink coconut water. It's great for you. Tell me a bit about coconut, because I've heard there's around 60 something trace minerals or more hydrating, something like, you know, it's 20 times more hydrating than water. What is your experience with coconut water?
I tend to use it as a bit of as a part of the adrenal cocktail, or for people who really need an extra boost of potassium. It's very, very rich in potassium. And so that tends to be my limit to it. Yes, there would be, without a doubt, trace minerals, because I mean, effectively the inside of the coconut is something that would turn into a tree, right? If the coconut was to grow. And so there's a lot of nutrients. That's where seeds and nuts can be so nutrient dense, because everything that plant needs to start its life is in there. But at the same time, not everyone would naturally have access to coconuts. So for some people, and I find myself in this, I've tried so many different types of coconut water and I just have one that I like. But there are other drinks that I'm drawn to. So I encourage people to try different brands, different types, and follow what tastes good, because your taste buds will give you that. I need that, but we've got to learn the cues. So coconut water is fantastic generally for, like you said, in summer especially. It's a seasonal thing.
Yeah, we're sweating a lot. Yep.
And so very rich in potassium, some trace minerals and that sort of thing, without a doubt. And just use it as you feel drawn to it. And at first people might be like, I don't know, but you said yourself, right? It's so refreshing, and you go for something that lights you up and makes you go, I feel so good when I have this. But in the middle of winter, would you necessarily feel like coconut water? Not necessarily. So if you don't feel drawn to it all year round, don't have it all year round. That would be my other thing. But if you do, enjoy it when you feel drawn to it.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Let's talk about trace minerals, and I guess in some of the foods and that. Like, I know over the years, obviously our soil is so depleted, even though they're saying, oh, I'm having a good diet. It's great that you're having a good diet. And we touched on that. You said, look, no one's telling you not to eat badly and then just have like a mineral tablet or something to you can't compensate a bad diet. But even with like I've seen in many studies that they're saying our soil is just so depleted that people think we're eating well, but we're just so depleted in minerals. So what are some of the, I guess, key mineral deficiencies? How can we test for that? You said like hair analysis, there's obviously some tests out there, but what are you seeing in terms of people that are not taking supplements, and they're eating just normally? Yeah, because our soils are depleted.
Yeah. So this is where I love that in my life I've finally looped back to some of my earlier beginnings where I did a lot of the ecology side of things and understanding. So what I've come to realize in the last few years, I've got an interest in regenerative agriculture. So understanding how we can leave the land better than when we first came.
Yeah.
So understanding, so glyphosate is used so much in broadacre farming, and it chelates, so that means it binds out a lot of the very important minerals. It kills the soil. So they say, oh, it's safe. It's not going to hurt you if it gets into you. But what about all the microbes that it does hurt? The whole point of spraying it is often to kill things or to
kill the bugs, right? Because the bugs love the fresh fruit and veggies.
And it's like the glyphosate in, say, wheat, it's sprayed on the wheat so that it dries out and it desiccates it ready for them to harvest when they want to harvest it, rather than letting it dry on the plant, for instance, and to weed kill around. But it has an impact on the soil microbes. And without those soil microbes, even if you've got beautiful, rich, loamy soils or clay or whatever, clay is very rich in minerals. It's just very dense and you don't have as much organic matter. The microbes can't do their job, and you need the bacteria and the yeast and the fungi and all of that. They've got amazing networks. If we think that we've got big networks being humans above the soil, the networks below the soil are something else.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And all the sprays, the NPK fertilizers and all the stuff of modern farming, it massively affects those. So even if the soil still has the nutrients there, which it could well be depleted on in many, many situations, especially stuff where the ground is constantly farmed and there's no manure put on. There's none of what used
the old farming practices that we're doing, right? It's all about making money quick. It's all about how can we do things faster, quicker.
Grow them bigger, make them look really pretty.
Yeah.
A lot of
perfect size fruits and vegetables instead of having that odd looking cucumber and all of that.
Yep.
God forbid you have a cucumber that's more bent than straight.
Yeah. It must be straight.
Yes. Bananas have to be this shape, you know.
The ridiculousness of it.
Yes.
And so the more that we get regenerative, I always encourage people to look at food and produce, and if they are getting meat, try and get it from a farmer or from a butcher that sources it from a farmer who does regenerative practices, because the more that you get the microbes active, you get so much more nutrient density in the food. And interestingly, we were talking about the taste side of things before. I'm old enough to remember when my grandparents used to grow stuff in their garden, the taste of that, how rich it was, and even some of the butcher food or fruit and veg, like the local places that came from more traditionally farmed stuff when I was a little person. Whereas compared to now, the taste is dead, and that's because there's not the nutrients there. So our taste buds respond to what's in the food. And if you eat an organic strawberry versus one that's just commercially produced, they taste completely different because there's actually more nutrients in those products that have had more active soil, more active nutrients and availability. And so try and source food local to you that's been grown by someone who uses techniques that, you know, there's manure and fertilizers that are naturally sourced, fish byproducts and that sort of thing. Then you get more nutrients in. But I find that when we do the hair analysis, when we do the combined, often my clients get a hair tissue mineral analysis and a particular panel of bloods, which are a little bit different from your standard, say, iron-only ones. There's magnesium, zinc, a couple of copper measurements, retinol, which is vitamin A, and sometimes vitamin D as well, although vitamin D is often chased but really isn't. That's a whole
more a hormone, right? Vitamin D is more like it's a hormone, not so much a vitamin or
It's corticosteroid hormone D is effectively what it is. And we don't need anywhere near the amount that we're told. But if you don't have magnesium, if you don't have retinol, you can't make vitamin D. You can go out in the sun, you'll burn. I was the person that burned into a crisp in a relatively short time once upon a time, but
didn't
now
get any vitamin D.
Yeah, well, thankfully I didn't worry about it too much, but I was taking it in that supplement that I mentioned and I didn't even know. And so it took me about 5 years to get that synthetic vitamin D out of my body. And it literally is well documented in the research that taking synthetic vitamin D causes renal potassium wastage. So if we go back to our earlier discussion and think about stress causes changes in our potassium and we lose potassium due to the stress response, then we take supplemental things because we want to try and help our immune system or we want to try and help our energy or whatever it might be. there are unintended consequences of a lot of those synthetics. So synthetic vitamin D can actually make us more tired, more prone to leg cramps, headaches, migraines, so many other things because it impacts on our potassium. So
what if someone is vitamin D deficient? What would you say to someone who look at the cause, but then would you just say get some sunlight, early morning sunlight?
I'd say eat sources of retinol. So that's things like quality grass-fed butter, eggs from chickens that scratch around in the garden or in the, true free-range chickens, not just ones that are said to be free-range in a shed. And ideally cod liver oil as well. And beef liver is very rich in retinol as well. So I'd be getting
Liver's good for so much, right? It's just iron and all sorts of minerals. But people are like, oh, pate. And I say, hey, if it's going to keep you healthy, a little bit of pate, it's not going to hurt you.
And worst case, you use capsules. I mean, if you don't want to eat it,
sure.
There's always a backup. So I'd start there, but I'd also be gradually increasing the magnesium side of things and go slowly. So for anyone that's listening and going, oh, I need to do all these things, please just pick one thing. I personally do one thing a week with clients and say,
so
right.
You can see what's changed, right? Because if you're doing 10 things, you're like, well, what's worked and what hasn't?
Yeah. You change too many things at once and it just adds to the haziness and the confusion. And I really want my clients to learn their bodies, learn their intuition on this feels good or this doesn't feel right or whatever. And if you go up too quickly with magnesium, you'll end up on the toilet and you'll probably end up with a headache and feeling really
diarrhea. And then you've got then you become, sort of like depleted even more if you're constantly having loose stools. What forms? Let's talk about the forms. You love talking about magnesium. Let's just touch on that. What are the forms and what have you seen works for various different, what people are seeing, what people are coming in for? Like there obviously be different minerals and hormone depending on where you are in your hormone cycle, perhaps mineral needs. We can go into a bit in sort of hormone fluctuation, but just generally, what are the common forms of magnesium? Because when you ask someone, oh, do you take magnesium? Yeah, I take magnesium. It's store-bought and they don't even know what form it is. And then they don't end up taking it because it's a big horse type capsule, right? They go, oh, magnesium is massive and it's,
And many people will end up, speaking of the toilet, they don't take that much.
Yes.
And they end up on the toilet because it's actually, there are certain forms which are laxative effect. And when your body's not used to it and or you're out of balance in other ways, sometimes you can't tolerate much at a time. So you really need to build up slowly rather than just going, I need magnesium. I've listened to them on this podcast. I need to take, if a little bit is good, a lot must be better.
I'll take 4 times a day and then,
Yeah. So as far as types go, for people starting out, I really like magnesium chloride. So that's the form in the mineral drops. That's the form in a lot of the sprays and the topical forms because you can often start with a small amount and then build your way up. Other than that, I like magnesium glycinate.
Yes, I love magnesium glycinate.
The glycinate is calming. Most people will feel that they sleep better with it. So you'd use it in the evening or late afternoon. Some people get ramped up by it. And if they find that they're energized by it, just take it earlier in the day. You just got to learn to listen to your body. Occasionally it can make people anxious. So if you notice for any of these that you just don't feel that it sits right, try another type. Don't stress it. And then you may be able to use it down the track. So don't fret that forevermore you can't have that. It just may be right here, right now, because it can be stimulatory for some, especially if their electrolytes are out of balance, that right then there doesn't, it's not ideal. Magnesium malate is another great one that's tolerated very well, I find, and often energizes. And so I get people having that in the morning, generally speaking.
How about citrate?
I don't like citrate at all. It has a negative impact on copper metabolism. And it often tends people more towards the sort of loose bowel side of things.
It's also been the most research, I guess, because I haven't researched a lot of these other magnesium. So it's the most common. So a lot of forms use citrate. Because it's been the most, sort of, I guess when a lot of studies are done on magnesium, it's the only form most common that they use.
Yeah, it's so often used and often citrate along with magnesium oxide.
Yes, oxide is very laxative. Yeah,
exactly right. The two together can be quite. And magnesium oxide is one of the lowest absorbable forms. So for every 100 milligrams of magnesium oxide, I think it's something like 4 milligrams of that is actually magnesium you can use. So not the most, they can say, 500 milligrams of magnesium oxide.
Yeah.
But that's the compound, and people often get confused by the labeling, which,
and then what other excipients are being used, and if they're taken as part of a multi, like is there other excipients which can be causing so many.
So if it's a 500 milligram oxide capsule, they may literally get like 20 milligrams of magnesium they can use, and they're going, see, I'm taking 500 milligrams of magnesium. That's heaps. And I'm like, you need to look at how much on the label. What does it say? Magnesium, how much? And it'll often say magnesium glycinate total, and then it'll say magnesium from magnesium glycinate and a smaller number, and you go off the smaller number.
Yeah, so many forms. So be aware of the forms you're taking, read the labels. People just go, oh, magnesium's on special, I'm going to grab this, and then they're taking these big capsules. So I guess with hormone and fluctuations like throughout, I guess, a woman's menstrual cycle, pregnancy, perimenopause, menopause, what have you seen with the influence in the mineral needs? Like, does it change with people, just even within the menstrual cycle? You've got the follicular phase and again, the luteal phase. That may change. Do you see that there's more need in certain times of the cycle? And again, during pregnancy, post-pregnancy into menopause?
Yeah. Yes and no. So yes, we have different needs at different times of the cycle, but it's not, in my experience, it's not set for like at this phase for everybody, at that phase for, or even for most women, because there's so many varying degrees of how much their lived experience to that point, or their burnout, how much iron they've supplemented with. The more iron infusions or supplements that women have had that I work with, there's often a lot more depletion because the body has had to deal with that sudden
big influx. And that's what they'll do, right? Doctors will be like, you're iron deficient, book them in for an infusion. And then they get this infusion. There's all these side effects that come in that first initial week or so of the infusion.
And there's a lot of dangers with them, which women are not told. I know of one lady who ended up with basically an iron tattoo over her arm because it didn't go right, and then ended up needing tattoo removal to get rid of the stain on her arm from it. And she felt after that infusion, she ended up with major metabolic disruption and other things which she'd never had before. And she's sure that these complications came because it was such an overload on her body. She didn't know of the work that I do at that stage. She's come to realize it, but she's like, it all makes so much sense because if you look at the timeline of when someone gets a symptom, if you look in the days, weeks and months before, there's normally a big stressful event, a big change in their life or whatever that leads to it. So if someone's already tired and worn out and then they do something big to try and offset that, it's often the straw that broke the camel's back. The body just doesn't have the mechanisms to kind of deal with that. So,
and the doctors are not asking them, are you going through a stressful period? Like they're just like, come in, like they could have just had the worst week and they're coming for an iron infusion or whatever infusion they're getting. Yeah. Right. And there's big overload on their body and it's huge. Like, and even with a lot of things that when they start supplementing, it's always best to start a little bit slower and build up, see you're going, because then you can't just go straight on a crazy dose and then,
Yep, absolutely. So then when we get, like, if you've just had a baby, let's say 3 or 4 kilos worth of you has just gone into this little human, let alone the placenta, let alone the amniotic fluid, let alone everything else, the changes in your body that have, especially for your first, when your body first goes, whoa, this is what growing a human is. Breastfeed, trying to learn what your identity is as a mum.
Yeah.
Mum of 2, or like as you have more kids, how you approach the world changes, and metabolically that takes a lot of energy. And I don't think a lot is focused on just how much we actually really need nurturing at that time, and not to get straight back into everything as we used to do and rest and nourish with really gentle foods that we can digest more effectively and all that sort of stuff. So I really see that women end up needing a lot more of all the things I've talked about today: whole food, vitamin C, beef liver is amazing, cod liver oil, magnesium, adrenal support. It seems like a lot.
Yeah. It's very different. Well, the way different cultures handle just even after pregnancy, like in Asian Eastern cultures, we have like, live at home nanny or someone that has like very different foods to really nourish you in that first 4 to 6 weeks after pregnancy. You're making these beautiful cocktails of soups with all of these really rich minerals and collagen and bone broths and all of the sort of stuff, right? And it's like not going outdoors and really just resting and eating really different diet in our culture. That it's all about eating these really nourishing soups that have been cooked a specific way and specific ingredients to to help the mother for recovery, right? And it's not seen in a lot of Western cultures. It's like people are back out there, you know, doing the same thing they did. There's no changes to diet. And you've just had a huge trauma to the body, right? You've just lost a lot of essential minerals and nutrients through the placenta.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of what I do is about trying to encourage people, whether they're at that stage, whether they're perimenopause, whether they're considering kids, like all the different stages, but learning about what your family would have done 3 generations ago, maybe more. Yeah. What did they do at different stages, different ages? What's an ancestral food for you? Now, obviously, you may not live in the same country that your ancestors did.
Your genetics are the same, right? I mean, you've come part of the genetics, is that?
Yeah. So you might, like, I've got German and UK, British kind of bloodlines, so to speak. I love me some potatoes, meat and veg.
Yeah, it's just in you, right? It's just
it's in there, but also deep, rich flavors from herbs and seasonings, and like that makes my body absolutely just go, oh. But my ancestors would have used a lot more organ meats than I was ever taught to do, and I'm still not educated and let's play on that one. So I do take organ meat capsules because I know that intermittently I would have eaten that. I just don't know the recipes and don't have the skills. So over time, I learn more and I try more and that sort of thing. And that makes me feel better nourished. But also I've come to realize through all the regenerative side of things and understanding, you know, I live in Australia now. I have a lot of foods that were natives, like as in naturally growing in Australia, the soil, my body responds to the surrounds. So I get curious about what tastes good that might be local foods, different natural, like warrigal greens instead of spinach. I try different things.
It's good to eat locally grown, as close to your locally grown produce, because it's better for your health. And even, like I said, same thing about honey, like try to eat the closest locally produced food because it's using that same environment that you're living, breathing, and would help you with, you know, going through, every day with the environment that you're in.
Yeah, totally. That's what I encourage as well. That's self-awareness.
Yeah.
And community, like you were hinting at. Both of my brothers have wives they're in Western Australia, but they have wives who are Malaysian. And so a lot of that culture came in when they had their babies and they were nourished. And that makes such a big difference to have that time. That time after having a baby, but even having a network. If you don't have that, I don't have any family nearby here, and we've been in the location we're at now for 13 years, but I've built a community whereby my kids are like, how do you know all these people? And I'm like, because I talk to people. But that means that if I need something, I can put a call out and go, hey, I'm short on this. Does anyone have some of this ingredient or this plant or whatever? Humans need to belong, and that sense of belonging, even if you don't have local family, sometimes it's a bit out of the comfort zone to get to know the people that are in your local area, but having a network around you mentally and physically makes such a big difference. So it's worth getting to know.
Especially after a child it takes a whole tribe or a whole tribe, I guess, to raise a baby, you know, let alone 2 babies.
Yeah.
But yeah, Kristen, I'm sure, you know, we're at the time we could be talking for hours on these topics. But I guess, you know, sort of wrapping up, what would be if someone is experiencing burnout, they feel fatigued and all the symptoms you described, what are some of the first, I guess, 3 things that they should do to start the recovery process? Should they seek advice, get some testing done? What would they start as the first couple of steps?
Yep.
To get some help.
I would start with the adrenal cocktails just as a simple step. And if you don't like orange juice or can't have it, you know, find another alternative recipe. I would look at getting the hair tissue mineral analysis and the suggested bloods. I can give you a link so that people can have a look at what all that actually means if you're not familiar with it. And also it's got the list of bloods there. And I would look at getting a consult with myself or one of my team, but also just all the little steps that we've talked about today. What jumped out at you? Think about something that really, if there was talk about the filtered water, talk about magnesium, like pick one of those things that really resonated with you and do that as start with the adrenal cocktails and then see if you can seek some mineral drops for your water or a decent magnesium or something, because our innate knowledge of that seems right. Like that first response is so often what our body needs. As soon as we start overthinking it, then we get it, you know, twisted in knots because we're overthinking things. But often if you hear something and it really resonates with you, just start with that. Keep it simple. Less is more.
And I guess seeking help. So I guess where can listeners learn more about mineral balancing, stress recovery, burnout? Where can they learn more about that?
So I have a website that has a heap of resources. So supportingbalance.com.au. And under the resource area, there's actually a number of webinar replays that you can see. I've talked about burnout in some of those. I've talked about a variety of women's health topics, low iron, that sort of thing. So have a look in the past ones. Each month I do a different topic, whether it's a webinar or a Q&A. So you're welcome there. And there's also information about how to work with us personally, myself or my team, so that you can get direct advice based on your situation and some more specific guidance if you need it. I do have an online shop there to buy some of the bits and pieces like the magnesium as well, but have a look around. If you've got any questions after hearing what we've talked about today, people are more than welcome to have a look on my website and drop me a line, and I can direct you to resources or whatever as well.
Awesome, Kristen. It was amazing talking to you. And it's so so under talked about, like just basic things that people can do, and it can make the world of difference. Like introducing a good magnesium will make so much of a difference to someone's life. So I'm sure, the listeners will be very excited, and we're going to drop her links again in the show notes. So please reach out to Kristen if you need, but thank you so much for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the conversation. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Holistic Health and Hormones podcast. If you found today's episode inspiring or informative, please don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. It will help us reach more people just like you who are on their journey to vibrant health and balance. For more tips, resources, or to work with me, please visit my website or connect with me on socials. And remember, your health is your superpower. So keep nurturing it, and I'll see you next time.